Cormac McCarthy hated modern society, but it wasn't just because he was some old boomer who was complaining, but rather, if you look at his first short stories, his first novel, and his entire bibliography, the main theme of all of them is about the negative direction we are heading as a civilization. And today we have new information from McCarthy, or I should say about McCarthy's views, from an article in Smithsonian Magazine that will not only tell us about McCarthy's views on the collapse of Western civilization, but also his views on why modern authors suck. Why, when you go read the Pulitzer Prize winner in fiction, it can't even compare to someone like Cormac McCarthy's works or authors who were writing 30 or 40 years ago. And we will finally have confirmation to set it down in stone of Cormac McCarthy's political preferences. And so if you are interested in that and my 200 videos that I've already done on Cormac McCarthy, then you are in the right place, because I have made over 200 videos on McCarthy's books, life, and philosophy, which make it the greatest deep dive into any author in the history of the internet. And so go check that out when you are done with this video. And so thank you guys for the support, and let's hop into it. So there is a new article in Smithsonian Magazine about Cormac McCarthy's book collection, which totals over 20,000 books. But we got some great quotes from his brother, Dennis McCarthy, who was McCarthy's best friend throughout his entire life, on Cormac McCarthy's conception of the world. And as I've talked about before in this video over here, titled Why Cormac McCarthy Was a Conservative, which got a ton of pushback on Reddit and from other people who can't imagine, who couldn't cope with the fact, because everyone is so politically polarized now, that their favorite author was a conservative. They can't imagine that you can be a conservative who is also very talented at writing. And I am apolitical. I don't vote. And I think that both sides of the aisle are dumb. So I'm not here to do a ha-ha moment. I am rather here to give you guys an objective look at Cormac McCarthy's political views. And his brother Dennis McCarthy said of McCarthy's political views: "He was a conservative country boy from the South who understood that the world is a dangerous place. He never left the house without a book. He never left the house without a gun. Both were equally unthinkable." And so there we go. From the best source that we can find other than McCarthy, who has also said that he hated Santa Fe because of liberals, and that in his 1992 interview with the New York Times, that he dislikes people who think that they can change the world through politics, or I should say progressive politics. And then also the article that talks about finding Republican membership pamphlets in his mail from some investigative journalists who went through his trash. All of that wasn't enough, but now it has finally been set in stone. And this is important because Cormac McCarthy, for those who can't conceptualize it, isn't some Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Lou Rockwell, Donald Trump neocon or modern conservative. He was a classically trained, classically educated, conservative country boy from the South. One may even say that if his political ideology was thrown into a modern context, that he would be called alt-right, because one of McCarthy's favorite authors was none other than Oswald Spengler, who wrote The Decline of the West, and McCarthy references him in, I think it's Stella Maris. He also references him in his notes in the Cormac McCarthy archive, and he also references him in one of his interviews. And so he was a huge fan of Oswald Spengler. And I'm not here to say that Cormac McCarthy was alt-right, but over the last 15 years or so, Spengler's ideology has been weaponized as a means of pushing this kind of cultural pessimism, like, oh, look at all these people out in the world, they all suck, and using that as a way to talk about civilizational decline, but in a sense kind of cherry picking what Spengler's maybe larger message was. But nonetheless, Dennis McCarthy says of his brother that, quote, and this is in reference to Cormac McCarthy refusing to read fiction for the last 40-something years of his life, since from around the publication of Blood Meridian. And, quote, why? The answer stems from McCarthy's deeply disparaging view of modern society, which he considered lost, divorced from nature, history, and tradition, and heading towards social collapse and apocalypse. Cormac considered contemporary fiction a waste of time, said Dennis, because contemporary writers no longer have a legitimate culture to feed their souls. And this is what I really want to focus on here, because McCarthy is 100% right. We wonder why writers aren't as good anymore. And someone will say, oh, we're as good. We have not surpassed the generations before us. There are plenty of good writers. There are writers that I would say are as good as many of the classic authors, but you are supposed to get better. The NBA champions of 2025 could smack the 1950 NBA champions. The best high school team in America could smack the 1970 NBA champions. And that's just because the game and tactics and all these other things have evolved. And the same is true in all other forms of art. When you look at music has gotten so much better, even though a lot of the people like the Beatles and all these classic people are great because they were the first and they have this rawness to them. But music has gotten better. The arts have gotten better. We could go down the list of all the artistic mediums. They've all gotten better. But when you look at writing, or I should say literature, whether that's poetry, creative nonfiction, or fiction, as a collective, we have not moved beyond where we were at, decades ago. And writing is especially hard to do this in because the arts, music, film, they can all use digital technology to enhance their practices, right? The music industry was locked down for so long because of equipment and recording ability. Now everybody has access. Same with film. Everybody has access. If you have, not that much money, not hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $10,000 to enough, for enough equipment to make something of good quality. But writing, you only need a pen and a paper. And the real commodity when it comes to writing is time, is immersion. And listen to what McCarthy said. Writers are built from nature and their connection to God, one could say, history and tradition. That's how all great writers were built. You look at someone like Flannery O'Connor. She had a deep connection to God. She had a deep connection to history. And then she inverted a lot of that. She messed with a lot of it. And those inversions, that deep relationship she had, made it good, made her, canonical. The same with Cormac McCarthy. He was rooted from a young age in nature. He came from he learned about the history of the South by walking around and talking about people who had been former slaves, literally. He was a part of an intellectual tradition. Like, there was all these things going on that helped him become great. And the same is true with almost all the authors behind me. We don't have that anymore. I didn't have that growing up in suburbia. And there are some rare exceptions out there. But even if you are an exception, even if in your little household it was held together, when you project yourself out into society at large and nothing out there is, holding itself up to the same standard, then you are stunted. Imagine having the views that you do, and maybe you've tapped into all these things that Cormac is saying, and then having a society where there are random people out there who are also ingrained in this, even random people that don't care about it. It's just the way that things are. And listen to what he says. Writers no longer, and this is his brother talking about his views, but him and his brother talked every single day on the phone. And we're, like I said, best friends. This is the authoritative source other than McCarthy, who has said similar things. Over on the Right Conscious Substack, I have an unreleased interview from Cormac McCarthy where he talks about finally getting a television in the 1990s. He also talks about wanting to throw that away and have a radio. And he talks about some of his views on technology. And over on the Substack, I also run a Cormac McCarthy book club where we read one Cormac McCarthy book a month, everyone. For instance, on September 20th, we are going to be reading The Passenger and Stella Maris. If you join the Substack, you also get access to the Cormac McCarthy course, which has over 30 hours of content, including McCarthy's unreleased interview, my Blood Meridian tour, my Blood Meridian for Writers course, and a ton of other cool stuff, plus all our archived book club calls. And so if you are interested in a deep dive into Cormac McCarthy and his work and want to talk about him with other people or be held accountable with reading, we are a very chill group. We also read 5 to 9 other books a month other than Cormac McCarthy, which makes us the most active book club in the world. Every other book club online that you can pay for from your favorite booktuber, that isn't me, does one book a month. I am an avid reader and I just select what I'm going to be reading anyway, and we talk about it. And so if you want to be activated, if you want to have a wide group of things to read and talk about and have a ton of other content streaming in, consider joining the Substack and supporting me, the Literary Renaissance, and my dream of activating 1 billion new readers. I also have free content over on Substack every single week, and so you don't have to pay either. And so moving forward, so McCarthy was very anti-technology. He did not have a computer or a cell phone until the year of his death, which was only a couple years ago. And if you think about it, that's pretty crazy because he was at the Santa Fe Institute. He was watching presentations and like obviously immersed in digital technology, for consumption, because that's the only way that you can kind of understand modern quantum physics and stuff like that. But even still, with all of that, he limited himself so that he didn't have to engage with technology. He stayed fully analog his entire life. And it's just so sad because it's not just about the writing, you guys. Our society is collapsing because people aren't multifaceted. When you read the article about Cormac McCarthy, he had 20,000, he read, tens of thousands of books. He was an architect. He had all these different hobbies. He could rebuild cars, all these things. And that's what you should be able to do across the course of 80 or 90 years. I spent my childhood in suburbia in Las Vegas during the summers when it was blazing hot outside, playing video games, watching TV because I couldn't go and do anything. And I would ride my bike and try to get outside, but it was almost impossible. Even my cousins who were, raised in a nicer place in the northern United States spent a lot of their time just on digital technology. And that was when we just had Game Boys and the PS1. And so it's not just about using technology itself, but what is lost, the time that is lost, because when you are young, people wonder why Cormac McCarthy can write nature passages so good, how he can unconsciously layer and do all this. Well, it's because he spent all his time out in nature to escape his abusive household. He immersed himself in it. He had mystical experiences in it. Then when he started to self-educate himself, because it was only the 1950s at that point, there was no Thomas Pynchon or anyone yet. He looked back to the great writers. Think about it like this. When we look back at a guy like William Faulkner, McCarthy looked at people, the same distance for McCarthy was people like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, Nietzsche, all the great 19th century authors. Like Faulkner doesn't seem very far away to me right now. Like he somewhat does, is somewhat elusive in terms of how I can conceptualize him and understand him. But when I think of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and those guys, they were living in a totally different world, even if I feel like I can understand them. But that's who McCarthy was looking back to. And then his Dostoevskys were people even further back, the Wordsworths, the William Blake, some of these other influences that he had, And I like that Dennis used the word legitimate culture because we do have culture, you guys. We have a society with culture, but is it actually legitimate? And I get it that this culture of classic society was controlled by the aristocracy. Tolstoy would be pissed off about, Cormac saying something like this. He talks about this in his book, What is Art? But it was legitimate. It did have rules. It did have artists that were building on each other. And it was meant to keep society together, to actually transform you and help you grow. And not, and culture isn't just art, but just the way that we lived. Because an artist needs that culture to feed their soul. And it sucks because when I look for culture, I have to look back. And this is so sad. And this is what I have noticed with a lot of my more conservative and libertarian friends who are somewhat similar to Cormac and in his ideology. They kind of turn into these primitivists. They idolize and romanticize classic society, but we can't go back to that. We can't enact that. That's, basically gone now. It's just really sad to me that we have people like Tchaikovsky and we have, Swan Lake and then even just dumb stuff like the Nutcracker and, any of that. And like you go and watch that, like my wife and I go to the ballet every single year and I'm just like amazed. But then when I go see like modern Broadway, I'm just kind of like, and it's like, all right, it's good. It's entertaining, the Book of Mormon, Spamalot, Hamilton, whatever. Yeah, it's good. But like I'm moved when I go see these classical ballet productions. And even when I go see some modern band that's actually good, that's really transformative. Like, I don't know, like I'm thinking of people that aren't unconscious or like too crazy. Like, I don't know if anyone out there is a fan of Niels Fromm. I've seen him live in concert. Anusha Shankar, like for rock music, like Explosions in the Sky. They put on very conscious instrumental only performances. But still, and I leave them like feeling elevated and feeling really good and like more positive and like realigned and all that. And that's awesome. But still, when I tap into more classic culture, it changes me so much more. And it's crazy that we haven't created, these pillars for all of us to look at, to feed our souls with. And I honestly feel like we have some of it. I feel like it is here, like there is enough, but the main thing we're dealing with is obfuscation, because I could go from reading, let's say, a Don DeLillo novel or listening to Anushka Shankar, or, you know, I lay down and like listen to records with headphones on and just like experience the music for what it is. And then suddenly I'm going to my buddy's house and I'm hearing about it. He's raging out because he put $20 on the Eagles and they're not covering the line. I'm like, I'm hearing about DraftKings.com and Crypto.com. Then I'm hearing Bernie complain and then Trump complain. It's like, oh my God. And I got to process all that. I have to take everything, all the craziness of the world, and try to fit it into this worldview. Instead of just having a worldview that's just already there for me, for then me to jump off of. I have to, like, as artists, as modern individuals, we have to somehow stabilize the insanity out there so that we can work, so that we can actually do something important. Because people act like you don't need that. But if I just want to sit down and do random shit and like write something and write just from my soul and just start typing, then whatever. Like, that's easy. Anyone can do that. If you just start drawing, start riffing on the guitar, whatever. But most of the time when I've done, I'm very centered, and I'm very centered on something, on some tradition, and I can jump off of that. That's what I try to do with my poetry. I try to ground myself in the Chinese nature poetry and Robinson Jeffers and all these authors, and be like, okay, this is where I'm springing up from. And the boat is like literally in a storm. And I can't imagine what other people are going through that don't have any lineage, any tradition, any history, any connection to nature or God. And it's easy to see that's why we have such bleak and unconscious art. And so Cormac McCarthy's first novel explores this. Cormac McCarthy's novel features a 3 different plots happening, and I'm not going to spoil anything here. There is an older man who is crazy. He was alive during the time of slavery. He's like in his 90s. His name is I think it's Arthur Ownby, if I'm remembering correctly. His last name is Ownby. And so he's like, and this is taking place in the 1930s in Appalachia, which was destroyed. So Cormac McCarthy actually watched where he lived get destroyed. Because when you think about the West, it was just colonized. Like, we booted the natives out. Too bad, so sad. And that's a joke. Like, it really is sad. But we booted them out, but nothing was really here. But in Appalachia, the roots were set down. And then in the 1930s, this industrialization happened, and everyone got ripped out of where they were living and the lifestyle they were living in after having lived it for easily over 100 plus years. And where McCarthy was from in Knoxville, they weren't into slavery around there. There were very little slaves. And so it was just kind of random woods people out there. And Cormac McCarthy's dad's job was to enact eminent domain as a lawyer on all these people and throw them off of their but their multi-generational land. And so McCarthy saw this great divide. So he knew these old people that lived in the old world, that were alive in the 1860s and the 1870s. Then he has a character who's in the middle, named Marion Silder, I think his name is. And he's like in his mid-20s or his 30s, and he is between both worlds. He's a whiskey bootlegger, but he's also a traditional man that likes to go hunting in these things. He's between the worlds. He has this obsession with sports cars like Cormac McCarthy. He has the Buick. And then we have this young man named John Wesley Ratner who is born into this world but wants to go back. He has this yearning, and this is something that Cormac McCarthy does in the Border trilogy, in The Road, in Suttree, even in Child of God. It's this nostalgic yearning to go back. And so when you look at his work, it just makes sense that he is into Spangler. It makes sense that he was, this conservative intellectual man that wanted a slowdown of where we were going with technology and was horrified by it. It's funny because he never left the house without a gun. Could you guys imagine? I live out in rural Arizona. And when I go to the grocery store, there is a high chance, unless it's like not busy, but if I go in like after work or on the weekend, I will see someone with a pistol holstered. And when some of my friends come from out of town, like, they're shocked. They're like, dude, why does everyone have guns? And it's so funny because I live in a safe place. I mean, I would say, but people carry guns because they're from the country, and that's just what you do. They're not looking to go shoot anybody. You just carry a gun. I mean, like, it's a whole different mentality. And McCarthy is awesome because he wasn't, like I said, in this politically polarized manner. So in Suttree, there is Running Through the Dew, who is a transgender character. Then in The Passenger, he also features another transgender character. And people were in an uproar. Like, I have a video on this, and people comment all the time, guess I'm not reading Cormac McCarthy. They act like these characters are like beating their daughter in some like track and field race. Or they're at like some school board meeting or like something. Like they're applying these modern political lenses. But McCarthy was an open individual. He wasn't trying to return or restore some Christian kingdom. He was okay with accepting people how they were. And he knew, because he lived in New Orleans and these other places, that there were weird people out there, or people who were different. And he was okay with that because he was different. He had divorced himself from his family and from his life. But that is actually one of the staples of classic conservative thought, or one could say actual first principle, a priori, conservative or libertarian thought. You can be and do whatever you want to do as long as you are not infringing upon me. And so I just love it. Like I see these pieces, like there was a piece by a political science professor who is a liberal, who is like, a democratic socialist or whatever. And he wrote a piece on why Cormac McCarthy was actually a liberal like a couple weeks ago. It's just so funny because he can't conceptualize that someone can be like this, that someone can be smart and talented and be cool with all people and like not need to freak out about them and doesn't need to be polarized. No big deal. He can also believe society sucks and not be some alt-right maniac, and be an individual who talks to everyone and is very sociable. And that's what the article also says, that Cormac wasn't a recluse. He just didn't like talking about his writing and would love to talk to you about anything else other than that. Anyway, so I'm glad that this article came out. I would recommend going and reading it. I have a deeper breakdown of it over on the Substack, but that is one of the points of the literary renaissance, you guys. It's not just about making a bunch of full-time authors. It's not even just about activating a billion readers. What do I mean by activate? It's about connecting people back to something deeper than just literature. It's about connecting them back to the real world. And books, funny enough, aren't the real world. They are a simulacra of it, but they are a channel back to it. They are a way to actually enjoy it more. One of my favorite things to do, and I do it almost every single day, is to go read out in nature. I live on the edge of the desert and have, for basically the last 20 plus years of my life, I don't know if that number's correct, like 15 years of my life. And I go out if it's the summer in the morning and bring a notepad with me. Maybe I write, maybe I don't write, and maybe I read something, and it's great. But it gets me out there, and I love to do it. I love going and reading with my wife at the park, and now with our daughter. Like it's great. I love reading about places and cultures, and then going and visiting them, and then having a better understanding, not just showing up. Reading can be used as the vehicle back to the modern world, but most of the time, digital technology, and especially like short form video content and like all this other stuff, usually isn't a vehicle back to the world. It is a vehicle into deeper and deeper levels of simulacra and dopamine, manipulation. That's, it's crazy, you guys. Like, don't get me going, but the last like week or so, like you guys haven't been seeing me post much. I've had to deal with all these things. But I've had to be on the computer a bunch for some work stuff and for some personal stuff because I'm like trying to finance something and I'm trying to do all this stuff. So I've been on the computer for like hours a day, and I've been on phone calls. I've just been like way too immersed in technology. And then I went out to the desert last night to read. My brain was fried. And that was just from some moderate use of technology for like a week because of a necessity. I can't imagine what people are going through, 8, 12 hours a day on their phone. Made it almost impossible to be like my positive, trying to be aware self. And so, man, that's what this is about, you guys. It's about a return. It's about a rebalancing. It's about an awakening. That's what you should be, not just be doing with your writing, but just doing in your day to day. Because if you do it with yourself first and awaken yourself, then it'll be much easier to awaken others. And so that is the message. That is what we are trying to do. That's what Cormac McCarthy did for me once upon a blue moon. And that's what I'm trying to do for you right now, and what I'm trying to advocate for the literary renaissance. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys, Boombada Connect, and I will see you guys very soon in the next video.